give a talk with somebody else's slides, you know, so I'm not exactly the height of propriety, but, you know, to have other people's jokes, it's very hard to work with them, you know, so. You know, in case Marc's watching out there, he's been a very good postdoc, you know, and so very independent, and, you know, he was the one that's really been driving this work, you know, and so, and we've been doing it in collaboration with people in the Duke Medical School. That was one of the nice, you know, attractions for coming to Duke, you know, so other than everybody says, oh, you left the snow, you know, so, but was to have the Duke Medical Schools about a mile away, and whereas in Cornell, it's in New York City because, you know, they don't have enough people to experiment with in Ithaca, you know, so. All right, so Jasmine described the spatial Moran model, and the three theorems talk about what the geometry of the pre-malignant field and the malignancy look like. And what we wanted to do was to actually apply this to something. I mean, the words about applications didn't really mean much to the people at Analytical Applied Probability, but I won't get into that further, you know. So, so a natural context is head and neck squamous cell carcinoma. I mean, this is something in the 1950s when this guy Slaughter was studying this. It's a cancer where it's a place where you can look at it rather than stuff happening inside your body. But there was a cancer field effect that around the malignancy, there was a pre-malignant area. And sometimes you would get a second malignancy at some distance from the first site. You know, I'll get back to this. The talk's out of order in terms of my, how I talk about it. So then we wanted to do a model that sort of explains this. And you'll see that the three regimes in Jasmine's talk address this. So, all right. So, you know, the collaborators, I don't know who the first guy is, but it's Jasmine and Kevin at University of Minnesota. Motivation, a clinical problem. You know, so this picture sort of freaks me out, you know. So I think it dates from the Rolling Stones or something. That's like, get your yayas out, you know. So I have no idea. Marc's very. If he's out there, let me tell an embarrassing story. It's like, in conjunction with graduate recruiting weekend, you know, we had this math slam where 6 people give 10-minute talks about their research, you know. So, so Marc decided to talk about breast cancer using many pictures of, Pamela Anderson from Baywatch, you know. So, and this turned out to be a great recruiting tool. But basically on the fact that the director of graduate students jumped up in the middle of his talk and said, this is disgusting, you know. So some women were impressed by the fact that, you know, he would do that, you know. So if you're listening, Marc, or watching it later, you know, so next time you'll come up whether you're sick or not, you know. So, all right, so we're focusing on head and neck squamous cell carcinoma. Not because we got a grant from the Miley Cyrus Foundation, who's concerned what might happen to her tongue, you know. So, but anyway, but it's an interesting thing. And what we're talking about, the thing that surgeons are interested in is sort of surgical resection. You have cancer in your tongue, and if you want to avoid these things, then stop smoking now, because that's one of the main risk factors here. So then you're talking about surgical resection, and so let's see, stick carp here, or no? I ran into him at lunch, had a nice conversation, and he goes, well, why would you want to worry about the size of the resection? You know, it's like, okay, if you don't mind losing your entire tongue, then, you know, you don't have to worry about that. But then, you know, if you cut it too little, you get a recurrence. Well, obviously you don't want to take too much. So then, you know, the question which we want to address with our research is what size surgical margin should you have? Okay, I should have warned people that if you're squeamish, don't look at the next cell, you know. So I tell Marc, surgeons say, come over, watch an operation, you know. So it's like 5 hours they were cutting. This is the tongue. I don't think it's that big, in normals, but in the middle, let's see, not. So this sort of black stuff in the tongue is the malignancy, and they have this rule of thumb. They go about a centimeter around it. All right, so, and Marc was there for about 5 hours and sort of left when they were still going. So one of the problems with this is there's a frequent recurrence, like 20 to 30%. So, whoops. Oh, okay, and it comes like 1 to 5 years later. So, so here, it's our happy tongue friend who's going to be with us the entire talk, So here was a primary cancer. You resected it, and then you didn't take enough, so there was a local recurrence nearby. Okay, so at this point, you want to go back to Jasmine's talk where we were talking about math here. So in Jasmine's talk, there were the wild type cells, the pre-malignant transformation, and then there's the tumor. Yeah, I have no idea what all these slides are for, right? So, and this is out of Jasmine's talk. Cancer is a multi-stage process, so, and one of the things that, I was reacting to your question, you're like, I thought you were saying, well, this is a ridiculous model, but it's a ridiculous model because it only has like 2 stages. So you have, it's usually a cascade of several stages. In colon cancer, which grows slowly and they have lots of information, there are probably 4 stages. One of the first work was done by Armitage and Dahl in the 50s, estimating number of stages from slopes of incidence data and from SEER. Oh yeah, okay, so I have no idea what that was from. So the thing is, the problem is field cancerization. This is a notion that around the malignancy is a transformed field of pre-malignant cells. Oh, okay, well that's clever. It's something that's not visible to the surgeon. I mean, it's not like the tongue is red and then it's orange and then there's this black stuff in the middle. So, these are sort of genetic changes that happen in the cell that don't affect them in a visible way. All right, so Jasmine mentioned in his talk is that epithelial cells, I mean, not only for our skin, but the lining of various ducts and stuff, the breast cancer ducts, I mean, the cervix, the uterus, the bladder, these are tissues that divide a lot, and cells that divide a lot are more prone to the genetic mutations that turn into cancer. And then there are lots of areas where you have potential for field cancerization. I mean, there's an interesting data set that we looked at one point, but got distracted from bladder cancer when they looked at genetic diversity of the cancer, right? So, all right, so, and again, the questions are, how big a margin? Is there another field present in diagnosis, which is actually probably hard to say, and risk of progression, which is sort of surveillance protocol. And actually, as we talk to the doctors more and more, is that, they don't worry about, calculating the risk of progression because once you get this, once you have one cancer, they're going to be seeing you every 6 months or a year for the rest of your life, so. Okay, so can we develop a mechanistic dynamic model to answer these questions? Or, as is often the case in mathematics, we had the model and we're looking for applications of it. Demo. All right, so it's a recurrent picture, so we have, as in Jasmine's model, they're going to be like type 0s, which are wild type cells, 1s, which are pre-malignant, and then 2s. All right, so many things are done using branching processes. I mean, and confess to have done that. I mean, something like leukemia, where cells circulate in the bloodstream, that's a natural context. Of course, the leukemic cells are being produced in the bone marrow, so there's a little bit of space back there, So So here's geometry matters. I just can't get the same enthusiasm that Marc does here. So, but anyway, he also has 35 pairs of shoes, so you always say that's a different personality here. I have 2 pairs of shoes, not counting multiplicity, you know. So, all right. So meanwhile, this will teach Marc to show up to conference, you know. So this is the oral mucosa. It's like if you look really, really closely at your cheek, I guess is what you would see. And we go ahead. I'm not used to pauses in my thing. So we're interested down here at the bottom. These guys are sort of stained purple. They're the stem cells. I mean, most of your epithelial tissue is set up like this. These guys down here, which are the stem cells that produce all the stuff above it. For a long time, the dogma was that you have stem cells, they always divide into one differentiated cell and one stem cell. And then the differentiated cells divide a limited number of times, and eventually they go out the top. And this sort of picture happens on your skin, in your colon, you know, lining your mouth. I mean, down at the bottom, you know, have this population that maintains the whole thing. And this is, in a sense, an intelligent design because all these guys down here, they're the ones you have to worry about mutations in. If you get a mutation in one of these guys, then it's going to be up and gone before it does you any damage. You know, so. All right, and then in the last couple of years, it was demonstrated by looking at stuff on the mouse epidermis that, you know, sometimes you get division into 2, and sometimes you get 2 differentiated cells. So you would probably go, yay, we got critical branching processes coming into the scheme here. And so this is like 80%, and these 2 are 10%. And it's a model that, you know, so that actually you can sort of see the motor model on the mouse tail if you stain things correctly. So, all right, but that's not going to play a huge role here, I don't think. Whoops, going backwards. Mr. Tongue is back, and now it has a square grid laid on it. You know, it's like, just like most of you when you look in the mirror, you know, so, you know, this, I'm staying over at the Durrett, and there's this mirror, I guess maybe that women use for makeup, and I turn around looking at it, and it's like, my head's like huge size, you know, but I still didn't see the grid on my tongue here. So we're using this as a very simplified model. I mean, this square lattice, it sort of depends upon how you want to do your models. You know, when I started talking to Francisco McClure about spatial models, and all these cells sort of push each other around, and, you know, in a solid tumor, you know, you get a denser and denser array of sort of tumor cells, which leads to hypoxia and then death of stuff. But, you know, for some reason, for doing math, you put these guys on a grid, and it's a good first approximation. And, you know, if we want to prove things like, you know, if you're an assistant professor at University of Minnesota Math Department, you might want to prove things, you know. My age, they can't get rid of me, so whatever. So, unless they cancel my parking permit. You know, so, all right, so we have this sort of model that Jasmine talked about. You know, 0s, 1s, and 2s. You know, you have your 4 nearest neighbors. You know, so. All right, so you know, you give birth at rate equal to your fitness. Replace a random neighbor chosen at random. It's probably not exactly what's happening with cells, but it sort of models the competition. You know, so. Movie 1. All right, so. All right. Gotta watch this fast here. All right, so no, I don't want to. So this is going to be a simulation of the basic bias voter model. Right? So this is the type 1s invading the type 0s. And they sort of jump back and forth, and this is sort of what the bias voter model looks like. It's not so sufficiently exciting, I don't want to see it again, you know, so. All right, so the next one I'll show you twice, if you're good, you know, so. So this one's going to be a bigger simulation. It runs really fast, so try to watch it quickly. It's going to, back to that process, on a larger length scale. Right? And here. Oops. All right, so got to be ready when I do that, all right? And we hope the cancer doesn't go like that in real time, you know? It's like, there you are, there's your tongue, it's all gone, you know? So, all right. All right. All right, so I'm going to show some with mutations. They sort of go fast. You can sort of see what's going to happen, you know? We're going to get 2 clones, and then for some reason, this one sort of starts out slow, you know, so we were waiting for, the time of the first successful type 2 mutation. Oh, there it is. There's a little one, and surprisingly, the little one gets the mutation first. You know, it's sort of, so obviously from the simulation, it's an exponential amount of time until the first mutation establishes, and then we get a mutation to type 2, and then, all right. And then one more, and then I sleep the rest of the time. This is a simulation that starts with one thing in the middle. I guess Marc got tired of waiting. It has a type 2 mutation, and it has a second one right at the boundary. It's like, whoa, what's happening? All right, so I'm not sure what the parameter values were, but anyway. All right, questions about the movies? Everybody's comfy? All right, so there was movie 2, sped up process, add mutations, movie 3 and 4. All right, so this slide was in Jasmine's talk. You know, so zeros, type 1s, the type 1s start to grow depending upon the value of this gamma. The gamma is sort of intuitively the number of successful type 1 mutations that you need to get a type 2, minus the fact that it sort of breaks down when gamma equals 1. I mean, well, we have a gamma equals 0 thing, so it's mostly, that's why Jasmine gave the more precise interpretation. It's like, how long a time do you need compared to the waiting time for the first mutation to get, you know, the second one? So when gamma equals 0, everything's going to happen in the first type 1, but this is a thing where I need, this is gamma sort of in between, so I'm going to need a finite number of these things before something happens, and then here I actually get a second primary tumor in this one and then in that one. So again, the whole thing of the delineating the 3 regimes was trying to understand this sort of geometry. So this is a situation where, you know, you would have a primary tumor and a distant field with actually a second primary tumor happening at the same time. But, you know, I mean, these are probably not reasonable parameter values because, you know, you don't want to do things with 10 to the 8 cells that take years and years. Right? All right, so this is sort of the cartoon of the mesoscopic model, you know, so I don't know, it's just sort of the referees drove us to this, you know, so, you know, it still takes, you know, like 30 pages to prove these stupid theorems, but we didn't really want to write 60 pages or something to do these things, so. I mean, it's fairly clear that the Bramson-Griffith shape theorem tells you this thing grows and has an asymptotic shape, all right? So, and they don't want to be hassled by worrying about fluctuations about this thing. And sort of we ignore, you know, mutations near the edge that might mess this thing up. And then, you know, I get a second field, and eventually I get, you know, a primary tumor, and then eventually I'll get a second primary tumor there. So. Model analysis. All right, so I said this before, I have normal cells, precancer cells, and malignant cells. I mean, this is a real oversimplification. I mean, in the work we're doing now of more clinical relevance, you have the different phenotypes that the cells go through. You have atypia, dysplasia, carcinoma in situ, and then fully blown full malignancy. And we did that because in many cases you don't know what this sequence of steps is, right? So in colon cancer, yes, but in head and neck squamous cell carcinoma, they tell you some of the genes are involved. And at some point we said, you know, why do I need to know this? I mean, these are phenotypic changes, they happen at certain rates. So let's forget about what gene was, being mutated. And dimension d greater equal 1, so d equals 1, I'm not sure. There's, maybe breast cancer ducts, although they tend to be about 40 cells around. D equals 2 would be sort of the main one, since a lot of the epithelial tissues like the edge of the bladder and the cervix are 2 dimensions, 3 dimensions, and then, well, what the heck, right for general D, unless, if we find that somehow there's a relevance of cancer to string theory, all right, so we want to do calculations for this. This is why we use the simple model. So here's the sort of the timeline. So we're in a situation where we think that there are going to be a number of mutations that lead to the final result. All right. So, and something that starts back here is bigger, and in our little universe, these things just blow up like little balloons. All right. So, and then the more recent ones are smaller. All right. And we have some idea about the dependence on this on S. And then inside this growing cone, you have these things that in space-time, they look like this. And, when I have enough area in these cones, then I'm going to get space-time volume in these cones. I'm going to get a mutation. And the question is, how long does that have to take? All right, so the theorems are very tiny, which is okay, because you probably don't want to read these things anyway, all right? So the first thing is that when the malignancy happens, what size is the field that it happens in, all right? So here we have a size biased pick from the joint distribution of the malignancies, and they're initiated at times of a Poisson process, so we know what the sizes should be. Then I get a size biased pick. The one I'm getting is proportional to its space-time volume. And actually, we were hoping that Jim Pittman here had a student named Tran who did some really nice results about size biased picks in a certain setting, and we were hoping she was going to tell us something about our setting, but that their machinery doesn't seem to, after talking to Tran and to Jim Pittman, their best advice was, why don't you just simulate the things? Okay, so, all right, well, anyway, so, not that I want to ruin Jim's 65th birthday here, but, all right, there are formulas. These are going to be on the test here, so, basically, you can, at the time of tumor initiation, you can tell what the sizes of the tumor fields are. This is, looks a little ugly, but it's just like I have a bunch of cones that are started at sizes of, times of a Poisson process. And when they have enough space-time volume, they generate a mutation. And, you spend a couple of months, you figure out how to do this, do this calculation. So it's easy for me to say since Jasmine and Kevin and Marc Ryser did this calculation, but anyway. But one of the points here is that you can do lots of calculations. Like this, stuck in a loop, maybe Steve will reboot me and get out of it here. So I can calculate the number of fields. There are formulas for everything, but this is not 18th century applied math. It's not like I'm going to say, oh, the mean number is 2 pi times 17. But here there are formulas and they look a little ugly, but you can do them numerically. So the key insight, thank you, Marc, getting me to be back on track here. How do the microscopic parameters influence the geometry of the invisible precancer fields? All right. Okay, now let's go back to the clinical issues outlined in the beginning. All right, so Mr. Tongue is back. All right, so how big should the margin be to avoid recurrence from unresected portion of the field? You can tell he's been hanging out with doctors. All right, so excision margin, 0 is not a very good idea, right? So it takes a while for the thing to come back. This is years, I guess. So I have no idea why the units are like this. 0 centimeters. Personally, I would call that 2 centimeters, but you know me. 2 centimeters is about the same as 0 centimeters. I mean, so 4 centimeters is a little bit better. 6 centimeters really does a good job. And try not to think about how big 6 centimeters is compared to your tongue, you know. So, you know.
Are these supposed to be like actual numbers or?
Yeah, I mean, there is clinical data that they did on, doctors don't want to do math. You know, we had a bunch of people we did 2 centimeters, 4 centimeters, and these are the results we got. And it's sort of I don't know. I think, yeah. I think I didn't go watch the operation, maybe talk to somebody at Stanford Medical School. I would assume that they'd go all the way down, but yeah.
Is it 2 centimeters including this tumor or excluding?
No, this is the margin.
The margin.
Yeah. All right. So other questions? I think this is consistent with experimental results, and this may be, the source of these numbers. So it's one of these things that when you get the slides, you go, I don't know what it is. So I can tell you multiply by 2 and multiply by 3, but beyond that, I don't know.
So this is predictions from the model?
Yeah.
And you parameterize, what's the data that parameterizes it? Like, how do you get you do it starting by measuring mutation rates and growth rates?
Okay, so this is, so there's a bunch of SEER data on incidence versus time, right? So we have a model that has, I think I'm doing okay on time. Talk ends at 3:30, right? So, is that? You talk will end at 3:30, right? So in the 3-stage model, you have, so this is pre-malignant. This is malignant. And these are, whatever the malignant said, this is like dysplasia, atypia. These things are sort of neutral. So we have a good, from earlier work, we know what, in sort of Stephen Mosley's thesis, what, times are to the first type 2, and type 2s, because this is neutral, and type 2s are coming in at a Poisson process. So we feed this into the front end of the work you heard about in the last talk. We can get predictions for, incidence versus age. And Marc used that to match sort of mutation rates and selection coefficients. So these are all sort of selection ones. This is 1 plus S1, and this is sort of 1 plus S1, 1 plus S2. Sort of the mutation rates, not only do they sort of make sense from a sort of biological point of view, but when you fill in the selection probabilities, you get sort of incidence versus time. I'm not sure this is the best way to parameterize them all, but it's at least done by comparison with data.
If I can just add that there's also a lot of experimental data for some of these S parameters for this particular data type via proliferation staining.
S is always relative to the sort of neutral.
Yeah, that's why I write this.
The previous.
So how do you do it? You just put in a computation to compare the proliferation rates of pre and post?
Well, it's Ka67 staining.
Yeah, but that only shows, it's a correct.
Well, it just tells you what fraction of the guys that are, in the cell cycle actively divided, right? So it's sort of a mild thing of recurrence rate. Yeah, so, all right, but it's sort of the best you can do. It's like, a lot of the sort of more population genetics have come up with very low values of selective advantage. You can also fit it with the sort of what they know about progression. All right, so other questions? These are good questions. All right, so probability of recurrence as a function of resection margin. Yeah, I know 20 is not, not so good, so unless, let's see, what's green? If you're already 90, I mean, who cares, right? So something else is going to get you before that, so I don't like to look at this graph, but anyway, so if you're 60, well, great news, you're going to die of something else before the cancer kills you, so, but, all right, so you can do these calculations. I mean, this is not something that, surgeons really worry about because they don't operate in a world of like, oh, you're cured, go home and something happens, calls later, they still look after the patients after they're released. All right, so, all right, recurrence, local versus distant. All right, so this is the sort of three regimes of the model, although this one is on a lot larger scale. So this, and again, these parameters, the parameters of simulation don't have a heck of a lot to do with the parameters that you really see in reality. So here, the biased voter model in 2 dimensions, when the size is small, has a very fractally boundary. I mean, you saw in Jasmine's talk that the number of boundary cells is like when it is k over log k roughly times some constant when its size is k. So it says if it was a compact ball, it'd be like square root of k. So this is, sort of very fractally, but one would expect that if this thing had grown up quite a bit before the mutation happened, it would look more like a ball. So these are probability of local and distant. Let's see, I have to go back to see what I'm talking about. Oh, time to local and distant recurrence. This is regime 1 where the mutation happens in the first malignancy. Here's sort of regime 2 when there's small number of things, and then I guess I have debates with my co-author about this is mathematically a very interesting thing, but this is when there are a large number of mutations before you get the first malignancy. I mean, it's an interesting mathematical regime, and actually one of the challenges which the referees didn't really understand is that we have results that go across all these. There are no seams between the results. Of course, I find that often referees misunderstand some of the great points of my papers. So that's probably how I write them. All right, so. Ironically, in this world, the sequel is coming out before the first one has been accepted, so it was good that they got me off the team. I actually bailed off the team. It says Journal of Theoretical Biology, and that's probably the way Journal of Theoretical Biology works. That should probably is already online or something, right? So, so that work is out, and let's see, ongoing work. So these doctors over in the medical school, I mean, they're very excited. We meet with them, about 3 weeks to a month. Marc's he's going to be looking at a lot of sort of pathology data, so you have to do this. There's this internal review board process to get access with the data, and he's actually doing that. And I forget. I guess Walter Lee is a surgeon. Neil Reddy's more of a sort of researcher, but I mean, that's it's somehow gratifying when we're sitting there having this meeting, and this these guys say, well, this has really the math's really made us think about this process in different ways. I mean, so I'm not sure the model's completely parameterized right yet, because then there's some stages in the process that seem to take a really long time compared to, it's known from lots of examples that from initial mutation to tumor is like 8 to 10 years, but we seem to have a model that, I'm not sure it's parameterized right, that from dysplasia to full-blown cancer is like 30 years, so, which would be good, but if it's true, but I'm a little worried about it. All right, so again, I sort of, this is the sort of more complicated model again, I sort of got strayed away from my outline. And they're going to collect clinical data and actually, you have the resected thing, and the pathologists can look for, malignancies in the, surrounding tissue. And then again, of course, the holy grail is to be able to, look at, patient data or imaging of the tongue to be able to say, what sort of resection margins would be best. Right? So, Marc loves this slide. I have no idea. But it's cool, but it's just sort of his vision of what he wants to do. Mathematical model, informing diagnosis, treatment, and follow-up, and patient data feeding in from the other side. All right, so. All right, I didn't do the slide justice that it, but I can do this one, Joe. That's all, folks. All right, so. All right. Finish with 5 minutes. Yes.
You or Marc noted the work of Kristen Swanson.
Yeah.
Because it's very relevant for the next stage of your project, which is try to use imaging and clinical data in order to compare the outcome of a mathematical model with clinical reality. Obviously, her model has nothing to do with pre-malignant tissue that might be not taken care by the surgeon, but it still is about what the model predicts that this is the growth and this is the imaging, and we're basically trying to extrapolate what the model predicts from that clinical data we can use to sort of fine-tune the model and also allow the surgeons to do a better job next time around. Because they're working with gliomas and those usually can be treated, so the number of treatments the patient has to go through is usually just all the time until the patient eventually obviously dies. The next thing is, so you guys
Do I get to answer the first one?
Yes.
I think in her situation, you're dealing with gliomas, so there's an initial MRI at diagnosis, there's a second MRI right before surgery. You really have a lot of action in the glioma over that 2 or 3 months, which is unfortunately. So I don't think that here you're going to have that sort of observation window. I think even if you sort of spend, it takes 2 months to get scheduled for surgery, I don't think a whole lot has happened. But I mean, certainly, looking at surgery and clinical outcome. But part 2.
Part 2 is about the role of these precancerous tissues, which is so the surgeon goes and says, well, this is what the cancer really is, so just take this with a healthy margin around, and then just going to assume that the rest is healthy. And recurrence is supposed to happen from these precancerous tissues that the surgeon forgets about. But another explanation, there's something that some colleagues of mine have been working on with, is that as the tumor grows, it sort of conditions the microenvironment of the tumor such that if you leave any cell behind, you don't need to leave a substantial amount of tumor cells behind, you just need to leave a few, and that's bound to happen. You have an environment that is ready to go, so when the tumor cells decide to start going again, they have all the infrastructure to go much faster than they were at the beginning, so that could be another explanation for that. This is something that could...
Yeah, I mean, this is, it's a type of modeling that, I'm not ready to dive into yet. I mean, these sort of hybrid discrete cellular automata where you have cells, usually still on the lattice, but they're interacting with glucose and oxygen and hydrogen ion concentrations, so that, what?
That would be more complex, but you could have, so basically in most tumors, you have tumor cells, but you have also the cells like fibroblasts or macrophages. So you don't have to necessarily model chemicals, you can just basically have all the lattice-sites that are actually tumor cells, that are cells that can do things for the tumor.
I understand in the next talk we're going to hear about game theoretic interactions between various types of cells by somebody sitting very close to Dan Fisher at this point. All right, so, yeah?
In the simplified model, can you compute the probability that the primary tumor occurs at the largest compartment as compared to the second largest and so on? Or
Yeah, I think that's among the formulas.
is that something, that probably doesn't depend on anything, right? I mean, it's probably something,
Well, no, it's still,
or does it depend on the parameters?
well, it's a race. I mean, it's sort of like, we have you know, obviously in the gamma going to 0 regime, that probability is 1.
Right.
But I think, you know, in here, it's going to depend sort of, there's going to be a lot of variability. I mean, I guess there's some overall average probability. But I don't think this is easy to compute, sort of except sort of numerically. I mean, the way this thing goes is like, you know, okay, I'm going to look at, you know, the initiation times are a Poisson process, which is not a very good Poisson process here. I condition on these things. I know what the volumes are. I know what the joint distribution of this is. I know the relative probabilities of the first thing being in the various things, and I get this expression, which I evaluate from there. I mean, Jasmine's, yeah, fine. So it's sort of, yeah, and sort of, yeah. I mean, these, you know, these expressions I get, I sort of flash them by fairly quickly because I don't think they're all that informative, you know, but, you know. In principle, yes, but in practice, you don't get sort of simple answers that you sometimes get in population. All right, let's thank Jasmine again for her talk. Get half an hour before David Basant is going to talk about evolutionary games and something or other.